Hello everyone, and welcome back to a brand new series on my channel. So in April 2021, the Thomas and Nick uploaded a video on his channel called In Defense of the Hit Era. I liked the format of this video, and thought, why not do something like that for every era? Not a defense of every era, because some don't need and some don't deserve defending, but a review of each era to see how they stand up now some time has passed, in a similar sort of style to his video. But I didn't want to directly copy his style, as I'd be accused of plagiarism, so I started playing the series in a similar but different format to his original video. But the format I planned on using for this video was almost the exact same format he used in his updated defense video. This video has been in the works for some time now, and the main reason it's taken so long is something I like to call a standardization. I've given each episode in every season a colour: green for outstanding, light blue for great, dark blue for good, yellow for okay, orange for bad, and red for awful. The problem with this is that episodes are skewed somewhat depending on what era they're in. Imagine an okay episode from season 5, and an okay episode from season 14. You might be tempted to give the season 5 episode a fairly low mark, as it's not that great compared to the rest of its era, and you might be tempted to give the season 14 episode a fairly high mark, as it's very good compared to the rest of its era. You have now given the season 5 episode a lower mark than the season 14 one, when really it would at least be even, if not the other way round. To make sure I make this mistake as little as possible, I had to plan every era's video before I could start seriously making the first video. I can't promise that no errors like this will creep in, but I've tried to keep them to as few as possible. Now that's out of the way, let's get on with the video. What defines an era of Thomas is very subjective, with many fans having slightly different versions of how they divide up the eras, depending on production company, source material, how it's made, head writer, narrators, etc. For the purpose of this series, this is how I'm dividing up the eras. Seasons 1 through 5, the Allcroft or Classic era. Seasons 6 and 7, the Ghislaine era. Seasons 8 through 12, the Hit era. Seasons 13 through 16, the Nitrogen or Miller era. Seasons 17 through 21, the Renaissance or Brenner era, and seasons 22 through 24, the Brother era. I currently have no plans to cover all Engines Go. Let's dive on into the Allcroft era, with the one that started it off, Season 1. Season 1 immediately starts off with a bang with the episode that is Thomas and Gordon. This episode is a great start to the show, setting up Thomas as the main character and Gordon as what I can best describe as the most constant, friendly antagonist or antagonistic friend, depending which angle you're coming from. A light blue. Edward and Gordon is next, and it continues the Gordon is a jerk arc, this time pairing him with Edward, which is a very different pairing from episode 1. In episode 1, Gordon came out on top, and in this episode, it's Edward. Light blue. The sad story of Henry is a good introduction to both Henry and the Fat Controller. Yes, you can point to this episode as the first one to shoehorn Thomas into it, but it's a tiny nitpick. Light blue. Edward, Gordon and Henry is the first truly great episode of the show, in my opinion. A brilliant second half to Henry's opening saga, and unites the three engines beautifully. The first green of the series. Thomas's Train. And this is where the episodes start to go downhill a bit. There's nothing wrong with these, they're not bad episodes, they're just a bit ordinary and boring and don't stand out like a lot of this era does. Thomas's Train is probably one of the more silly stories from Warburt's tenure. Even if Thomas doesn't know what putting full coaches feels like, he should know what putting empty coaches is like. And wouldn't he find it weird that full coaches feel lighter than empty ones? It's still a good episode though. Dark blue. Thomas and the Trucks is a slight improvement on Thomas's Train, but still falls a bit flat when compared to the rest of the era. Dark Blue. Thomas and the Breakdown Train completes Thomas's initial arc in an incredibly satisfying way, but it is still a Dark Blue episode. James and the Coaches. While contradicting the first 5 episodes of the TV show, it's still a good episode if nothing special. Dark Blue. Choppers and Trucks is, in my opinion, the best episode in this low stretch, but still only a Dark Blue. James and the Express presents James with his first truly triumphant moment. Choppers and Trucks redeemed him, and this episode saw him triumph over Gordon. Dark Blue. Thomas and the Guard. Thomas and the Guard is not a bad episode by any stretch of the imagination. However, it is the most boring of the season and one of the most boring of the era. Nothing wrong with it, just not much for it either. The first yellow of the series. Thomas Goes Fishing. A classic episode, quite humorous, but can't make it above a Dark Blue. Thomas, Terence and the Snow. A good introduction to Terence, as well as our first glimpse at Bertie. Dark Blue. Thomas and Bertie. This episode is about as classic can be, and it's a great watch. While a steam engine and a bus would never race in real life, this episode has some very realistic ways of what might delay them. I also love that this story was inspired by a board game the Reverend Audrey came up with to entertain his children while on a rainy holiday in Wales. Light Blue. Tennis and Turntables. I love the book Choppers and Engines, and this does a good job of replacing the opening saga in the absence of Henry and the Elephant. Light Blue. Trouble in the Shed. Another great episode, setting up the strike, introducing Percy, showing what a great character Edward is, and subtly shows Thomas's big-headedness. Green. Percy Runs Away is my favourite from the Choppers and Engines book. Edward briefly mentoring Percy is fun, and the runaway scene is very good. Another green episode. Coal is a weird episode for me. It's one I love, without really being able to explain why I love it quite as much as I do. This might be a bit of a hot take, but I'm giving it a green. It sets up Henry's second saga very well. The Flying Kipper. The most universally loved episode of Season 1, and one of the most loved in the show's history. A beautiful episode visually, with a great story, great music, and a very good and serious crash. An undisputed green episode. Whistles and Sneezes. This completes Henry's saga in a brilliant way. He comes out on top against Gordon and then against those boys. The 5th green episode in a row. Toby and the Stout Gentleman. And now, after that run of banger after banger, we're back down to earth. Again, not a bad episode. It's a good one, but not much else. Dark Blue. Thomas in Trouble. I'm not the biggest fan of this episode. It's good, don't get me wrong, but not great. Dark Blue. Dirty Objects. A great episode, best from Toby's book, with great setup, the first story to have the Toby-James dynamic, a great runaway, and a great crash. Light Blue. Off the Rails. Gordon episodes are usually the best ones, and this is no exception. Great setup, great continuity, good crash, and a beautiful ending visually. Green. Down the Mine continues on from where Off the Rails left off, and sees the end to the Thomas-Gordon rivalry, for this season at least. Green. And we end Season 1 with Thomas's Christmas party. I like this episode, but it feels a bit wrong here. I basically echo what Unlucky Tug said in the Season 1 review. It's not bad, but it's very much a part 2 to a part 1 we never got on screen. The flashback scenes feel awkward when we didn't get the original episode, and for people who hadn't read the books, this episode might be a bit confusing. Yellow. So, Season 1 had a total of 8 outstanding episodes, 6 great episodes, 10 good episodes, and 2 okay episodes. We also have an average score for this season, but an important thing to note for the average score is that it's a rough guide calculated from the colour system, and not actual marks for the episodes. These are used as a rough guide when it comes to comparing one season to another, not for an actual score. Season 1 gets a very strong 7.9 out of 10. My top 5 episodes in chronological order is that mid-season run of 5. Trouble in the Shed, Percy Runs Away, Cole, The Flying Kipper, or Whistles and Sneezes. As my favourite episode of the season, I'm going to go for a bit of a hot take and say it isn't The Flying Kipper. My favourite episode from Season 1 is Percy Runs Away. Season 1 was a truly great start to the show. It's had some slightly more boring episodes, but this season was all about setting up characters, locations, and how the railway worked, all of which it did brilliantly, and the highs this season were very high. How was Season 2 supposed to follow this? Season 2 started out with Thomas, Percy and Nicole. A solid start to the season, dark blue. Cal's was an improvement, featuring one of the few interactions we actually get between Edward and Toby, but still only at dark blue level, but only just. Bertie's chase is an improvement yet again. It's a very fun episode that pairs Bertie with someone other than Thomas, light blue. Save from Scrap is a good episode that first included the idea of a character dying, dark blue. Old Iron used to be my favourite episode of the whole show. It's not anymore, it's not even my favourite of the season, but it's still a fantastic episode, green. Thomas and Trevor is a nice little episode. Nothing special, but a nice little follow-up to Save from Scrap, dark blue. Percy and the Signal is a great start to Percy's book. A nice stroke with the backing signals, and one of those episodes where you're not sure whether to root for Percy or Gordon and James. Light blue. Duck Takes Charge is a great introduction to Duck, and a very fun episode that shows that Duck can stand up on his own to the big engines, and won't be pushed around and made a fool of like Thomas and Percy were. Green. Percy and Harold is basically Thomas and Bertie Part 2, and I'm not sure which I prefer. I love both of them. I guess this one comes slightly lower as it came later, but it's still worthy of the light blue. The Runaway is the first great story of Christopher's on TV. A great concept, a nice runaway, and somehow a really tense conclusion despite not being able to see the Inspector at all. Light blue. Percy Takes the Plunge is a bit of a nothing episode. Again, has a good concept and a good reference down the mine, but I don't even find the crash in this episode all that exciting. Dark blue. Pop Goes to Diesel is a bit ordinary really. Again, it's a good episode, but only worthy of a dark blue. Dirty Work is definitely a step up from Pop Goes to Diesel. Diesel spreading rumours about Duck via the trucks is a great plan, which shows his deviousness for one of the only times in the whole show, but it's still only a dark blue. A Close Shave is wonderful. Yes, maybe not the best way they could have ended the Duck and Diesel arc, but still awesome with a brilliant runaway and a great crash. Green. Better Late Than Never is an episode I find incredibly underrated. Yes, it's not amazing, but I think it's a good episode that tests Thomas and Bertie's friendship. Yes, Thomas is a dick, but he is in the Railway series. Dark blue. Brake Van is a very good episode. Yes, it had to be amended quickly to be able to introduce Thomas and Douglas after the missing coach was cancelled, and while the intros are a little rushed, you barely notice. The crash is a great one as well. Light blue. The Deputation is a great follow-up. The TV crew did a great job in skimming 4 stories down to 2, and it still makes sense and forming a flowing narrative. Light blue. And now we've come to Thomas Comes to Breakfast. If you've watched my channel for any length of time, you'll know my views on this episode. I'm not a fan of it. It's not a bad episode, but it's not one that I particularly enjoy. Why was the station master's wife cross with Thomas for spoiling their breakfast, when the whole house could collapse at any moment? Why is the Fat Controller cross with Thomas, when it was the cleaner's fault Thomas started moving? The TV crew removed the line in the Flying Kipper about the guard's cocoa to give it a more serious feel. Why wasn't the same done here? If the crash was treated with the respect it deserved, and Thomas wasn't blamed for the accident, then I would probably enjoy this a lot more. The first Orange episode. Daisy. I'm not a massive fan of the book Branchline Engines in general. I'm not a fan of Daisy. She's okay, I can accept she's well written, but I just don't particularly like her. This isn't a bad episode, but nowhere near my favourite by a long way. Dark Blue. Percy's predicament is a definite improvement. It has less Daisy in and features a great crash, but again, not my favourite. Dark Blue. Dead as Easel. And now we're back to the great episodes. Mainline Engines is one of my favourite books, and the TV adaptation of this episode definitely lives up to it. This episode is really fun, and does a great job at introducing Bill, Ben and Boko while feeling like we know them all already. Light Blue. Wrong Road is another episode I find underrated. Actually, I take that back. I think I personally overrate this episode. It's a good episode that I love without being able to say why. When I was about 2 or 3, I was sitting next to my sister who was scrolling through YouTube, and she found a brief clip of this episode. I misunderstood the episode slightly. I interpreted Edward being switched onto the main line as the main land, which made me feel really scared for Edward, as I thought he would be caught by diesels and scrapped. A bit silly thinking about it now, but it meant when I finally found the whole episode years later, it was very satisfying to watch. I think the reason I love this episode is a weird mix of nostalgia and that scene at the station. It just has a brilliant atmosphere that I don't think has been captured in any other Thomas episode. Green, no questions. Edward's Exploit is a fantastic episode. The book version is definitely better, as there was only so much damage they could afford to do to Edward's model in the episode, but it's still one of, if not the best Thomas episode ever. And the fact that it is the only episode where he's truly the main character, in his true persona, and it's a good episode, makes it even better. Green. Ghost Train. This episode has grown on me in recent years. I didn't used to be a massive fan of it, but now I really like it. The spooky vibe, even though we know exactly what's going on, is brilliant. Light Blue. Woolly Bear is another good episode. Not brilliant, but still good. The Percy visual is quite funny, and my only real complaint would be, haven't we seen enough of Percy and Thomas fighting this season? This season sets up the whole Thomas and Percy are best friends thing, but I don't think we've seen them get on once this season. Dark Blue. Thomas and the Missing Christmas Tree is alright. My main complaint is that it's basically just Thomas's Christmas party and reputation mushed into one. It's not bad, but it's one of the worst of the season. Yellow. Season 2 had a total of 5 outstanding episodes, 8 great episodes, 11 good episodes, 1 okay episode, and 1 bad episode. The average score for this season is 7.6 out of 10, so a slight downgrade on season 1, but still a very strong season. My top 5 episodes for this season were easier to pick out than season 1, as there were only 5 green episodes. They are, in chronological order, Old Iron, Duck Takes Charge, A Close Shave, Wrong Road, and Edward's Exploit. And it should come as no surprise to hear that my favourite episode of season 2 is Edward's Exploit. Season 2 was a great continuation to the show season 1 started. Not quite as good, but season 1 did set the bar pretty high, and I think the highs of the season are higher than the highs of season 1. Let's now move on to the so-called Golden Age, starting with season 3. Season 3 opened with A Scarf for Percy. Not much to say about this one. It expanded on a railway series story and, in my opinion, improved on it. But it took a pretty mediocre story and turned it into a pretty underwhelming series opener. Dark Blue. Percy's Promise shows right out the gate how great Season 3 can be. Percy's Promise is a brilliant episode, with Percy overcoming all odds to get the train home through the flood. Green. Time for Trouble is another fantastic episode. It continues the Toby James dynamic, and Michael Angelis does such a good job. Green. Gordon the Famous Visitor is another great episode, a really fun retelling of Donus Engines. Light blue. Donald Stark was never one of my favourites. It's a good episode, but never really been up there in my opinion. Dark blue. Thomas Gets Bumped was an episode that always felt a bit disjointed. I know most of the stories based on comics were two comics strung together, but most of them connected well. This one has two different halves that have nothing to do with each other, and I always thought they were two separate episodes. That being said, the two halves are both good, if not strung together very well. Dark blue. Thomas Percy and the Dragon is a step up. The two comics this story is based on are related, and they form a cohesive narrative, but still only a dark blue. Diesel Does It Again is another step up. It's a good reintroduction to Diesel, and episodes where Percy and Duck star together do tend to be rather good. Light blue. Henry's Forest is, in my opinion, the best of the stories based on Andrew Brenner comics. Audrey's criticisms are valid, but only when talking about railway realism, rather than episode enjoyment. Green. The Trouble with Mud is an interesting one. It's an adaptation of an Audrey story, but with a massive change that I don't really understand why they did it. Changing the main problem from leaves to mud. Still a very good episode though. Light blue. No Joke for James is an episode that has grown on me a bit in recent times. It's still quite low on the season ranking, but I like it more than I used to. Dark blue. Thomas Percy and the Post Train is the episode where I become a walking contradiction. I always say that you can't say an episode is good based on its visuals, and yet that is the main reason why I like this episode as much as I do. This is what I've now come up with. Visuals can be used as justification to enhance an already good episode, but they cannot be used as the sole justification of why an episode is good. This episode would be good without the visuals, but then you add the visuals in, and I just find this episode stunning. This screenshot here for the episode is probably one of my favourite shots in the whole show. Light blue. Trust Thomas is another decent episode that tests Thomas's friendship with Bertie. A good episode, but nothing special. Dark blue. Mavis is a good introduction episode to Mavis. I much prefer Mavis to Daisy, both the characters and the episodes, but still only a dark blue. Toby's Tightrope is an amazing episode, by far the best of the Brandtine Engines book. This episode is intense and brilliant. Green. Edward, Trevor and the Really Useful Party is a very nice episode. Not amazing, but one I like. It's right on the border between dark blue and light blue for me, but I'm giving it a dark blue. Buzz Buzz is a fine episode. Not amazing, but it's still a good one. Dark blue. All at Sea is an outstanding episode. Visually, it's stunning, and the plot is brilliant. For the first episode of the show to be written by Allcroft and Mitten, without being based on works by an Audrey or Brenner, it's a very strong start. Green. One Good Turn is another episode that is good, but towards the bottom of the list. Not bad, but definitely not great. Dark blue. Tender Engines is another weird episode. It's not a bad episode, but it's a bad adaptation. The first scene is quite neat, directly showing a scene that was mentioned in the original book, but removing the scene with the Fat Controller I wasn't a fan of. Dark blue. Escape. Now this is the big one. This is the episode everyone talks about when talking about Season 3, and for good reason. It's a fantastic episode, based on a fantastic story, and adding an extra element with Edward and Trevor. Green. Oliver Owns Up is another good episode, and a great continuation of Escape. It shows Oliver's big-headedness and his comeuppance is very satisfying to watch, with a great and creative crash. A light blue. Bulgy is another great episode that I have a lot of nostalgia for. I used to always get my mum to read the story to me over and over again. light blue. Heroes is another one of the better comic-based episodes, and the final seed is done so well and intense. Light blue. Percy James and the Fruitful Day is an okay episode. Again, not bad, but not great, and definitely my least favourite of the season. Yellow. Dobbs and Percy's Christmas Adventure is by far the best of the early end of season Christmas episodes. It's the only one they tried something different with. A very good episode. Light blue. Season 3 had a total of 6 outstanding episodes, 8 great episodes, 11 good episodes, and 1 okay episode. The average score for this season is 7.9 out of 10. My top 5 episodes for the season were a little harder to pick than Season 2, as with 6 green episodes that meant only 1 had to miss out. My top 5 are, in chronological order, Percy's Promise, Time for Trouble, Toby's Tightrope, All at Sea, and Escape. My number 1 should be no surprise whatsoever. Escape. And now, the main question for Season 3. Is Season 3 truly the first season of the Golden Age? In my opinion, it depends on what you count as valid to include in a Golden Age. I may be wrong about this, but I think a lot of people who talk about the so-called Golden Age of Seasons 3, 4 and 5 were all around the right age for Thomas coming out during those years, so they will obviously have nostalgia points for them. In my opinion, Season 3 is no better than Season 1. Both have a rating of 7.9, but that's because they've been rounded. If you go to more decimal places, Season 1 is higher. In terms of episode quality, Season 3 isn't quite up there with Seasons 4 and 5. However, in terms of the aesthetic, Season 3 fits in with 4 and 5 better. The visuals and music match the seasons more closely, Angelus is the narrator, and starting to move away from directly sticking to Audrey's word-like lore. So whether Season 3 is the first of the Golden Age depends. Do you count Season 3 because it feels like it fits in with Season 4 or 5, or do you not count it because the quality, whilst being very high, isn't quite at that level? Personally, I'm torn, but right now, I'm probably leaning in favour of it not being in the Golden Age. Now, let's move on to a season which is undeniably in the Golden Age, Season 4. Season 4 opened with Grandpuff, which is universally loved across the whole fandom. It has a slightly darker tone and has a great story. My only real complaint with this is the way it's told, but I do like a new railway being introduced through an existing one. The way it's done in the Railway series, with Edward seeing Skarloey, I think, is better than the engines just deciding they want a story and Thomas telling them one. Maybe if it's Edward telling this rather than Thomas, I might feel differently, I don't know. But despite that tiny nitpick, it's a brilliant episode. Green. Sleeping Beauty is fine. It's a good episode, but it's dragged down by the first half just being a recap of what we have just seen. This didn't happen in Edward, Gordon and Henry, just a brief one-line sentence recapping, rather than half the episode as it is here. Dark Blue. Bulldog is an episode I personally find a bit underrated. That's not because people don't like this episode, as I think a lot of people love it, but in my opinion, people always kind of forget about it in favour of Grandpuff. Grandpuff gets talked about loads, but not many talk about this episode. Green. You Can't Win is another episode that I think is a bit like Bulldog, always overshadowed by the opening episode. I don't think that it's quite as extreme as Bulldog, and I personally prefer Bulldog, but this is still an amazing episode that doesn't get talked about as much as it should. Green. Four Little Engines is an episode that has a special place for a lot of Thomas fans, as it is the only episode about Skarloey with him in his true persona. This is Skarloey's version of Edward's exploit, and while not as good as that episode, it is still a great watch. Green. A Bad Day for Sir Handel is the first okay episode of the season. It's not bad, but it's not great and is just a bit boring. Yellow. Peter Sam and the Refreshment Lady is similar to A Bad Day for Sir Handel, but a bit better. It's not a bad episode, but not much really happens. Dark Blue. Trucks is a great episode. It introduces Rusty well, and it has a great crash. Light Blue. Home at Last is fine. It's a bit boring, but brings back Skarloey and introduces Duncan well. Dark Blue. Rock and Roll is essentially the same episode again, immediately after. I do think this episode is slightly better, but then it was the second version in 2 episodes. Dark Blue. Special Funnel is a very good episode. It has a good plot and fantastic visuals. Light Blue. Steamroller is another very good episode, with the main conflict between 2 characters, both of whom are unlikable. Light Blue. Passengers and Polish is another good episode, but Duncan and Sir Handel being jerk stories do start to get a bit boring. Dark Blue. Guaranteed Engine is Rheneas' version of Edward's exploit and 4 Little Engines. I think it is the least good of the 3, but it's still an outstanding episode. 3. Rusty to the Rescue is a bit of a controversial episode. On the one hand, it's a great, tense episode that is almost escape level. On the other hand, it butchers Stepney's origin story in a way I'm not sure I can forgive, in what was Brit's attempt to separate Sodor from the real world, which I think started with Escape in the previous series, but it just paved the way for Magic Railroad. Overall, I think this balances out to a light blue. Thomas and Stepney is another episode which, for me, is like Thomas Percy and the Post Train, a good story that is improved by the visuals, especially the nighttime shots. Light Blue. Train Stops Play is a good episode that I've always liked, and had a bit of a soft spot for because I love cricket. Light Blue. Bowled Out is a great conclusion to Stepney's story, with a great way of teaching the Diesel a lesson, and a great scene with Duck and Stepney double-heading the Express. Green. Henry and the Elephant is a good episode, and a great way of working it in without the rest of Choppers and Engines coming after it. A light blue. Toad Stands By is a fantastic episode, with Scruffy being a great one-time antagonist. My one tiny nitpick is Toad's line to Douglas implies that he's Douglas's brake van in the TV show, carrying the railway series lore over, but in everything else in the TV show, Toad is shown to be Oliver's brake van. But other than that, tiny nitpick, it's a near flawless episode. Green. Bullseyes is another very good episode, spoiled slightly by not coming with the rest of Daisy's stories, but is definitely the best from Daisy's book. A light blue. Thomas and the Special Letter is another episode I feel a bit confused by. It's a nice episode, but it was changed so much from the original that there's not much left recognisable, and again, I think this was part of Brit wanting to keep Thomas separate from the real world, which again, paved the way for Magic Railroad. Dark Blue. Paint Pots and Queens is a great episode. I agree with Unlucky Tug that this would have been a great conclusion to Season 1, but holding it back to Season 4 gives it a much grander feel that I don't think they could have achieved with Season 1. Light Blue. Fish is definitely one of Chris Aldry's better stories. It's a great one. Light Blue. Special Attraction. And now we've gone from one of Chris's better stories to one of his less good stories, that was adapted for TV at least. The two halves of the story are quite good, but putting them both together and hence shrinking them does not do them justice. Yellow. Mind That Bike is the first non-Christmas series finale. It's a bit of a weird choice to end the series on. They ditched the Christmas episode for just one series, and ended it with a bit of a nothing episode, and it just feels disappointing to end a mini era of Railway series stories. It's not a bad episode at all, but feels a bit weird in this position. Dark Blue. Season 4 had a total of 7 outstanding episodes, 10 great episodes, 7 good episodes, and 2 okay episodes. The average score for this season is 8.1 out of 10. My top 5 Season 4 episodes are Grandpuff, Bulldog, You Can't Win, Bowled Out, and Toad Stands By. And my overall favourite is Bulldog. If you ask a Thomas fan what their favourite Thomas season is, you will probably get one of two answers, with Season 4 being one of them. I always find this a bit remarkable, as Season 4 is essentially just a mix match of all the stories they had left out, and yet it works. I think the first half of the series, with the narrow gauge and Stepney, is better than the second part, but it's still an overall amazing season. Now let's go on to the other two of the big seasons. Season 5. Season 5 opens with a bang with Cranky Bugs, which is a great introduction to Cranky, who is one of the best non-Audrey characters and one of my top 5 characters, in a great episode. Green. Horrid Laurie is another fantastic episode, with the Lauries being great one-off antagonists, and a great repeat of Toby's story. Green. A Better View for Gordon has always been one of my favourites from the season. It's a great episode, with Gordon being another of my favourite characters, with a great crash, and while I'm not a fan of Percy getting dumber as the show goes on, this episode has one of the occasions where it is genuinely funny. Green. Lady Hat's Birthday is a very experimental episode, based around a Fat Controller rather than the engines, and it is an hilarious episode. This was on the boundary between two colours, but decided on green. James and the Trouble with Trees is a wonderful episode, and the first to show the darker tone that the season would take. It's amazingly tense, and I like the moments where they actually recognise the danger of situations, instead of just continuing earlier arguments. Green. Gordon and the Gremlin. And after a run of near flawless episodes, we get to this episode. I don't think this is bad, but it's too unfocused and doesn't really know what it's supposed to be, getting through too many different things in just 5 minutes with no time to expand any of them. Yellow. By George is a good episode. It's a good return of George in his only main appearance after his debut story. Light Blue. Bar is a fine episode, but that's pretty much it. It's not bad by any means, but it just falls a bit flat coming in Season 5. Dark Blue. Put Upon Percy is a great return to the fantastic action episode Season 5 does so well. It's a great Percy episode and has a great runaway scene. Green. Toby and the Flood is one of my favourite episodes from the show. It's incredibly tense, with a great soundtrack, and actually has Toby's driver acknowledge that they will die if they go over the waterfall. An undisputed green. Haunted Henry is one of those universally loved episodes, and it's easy to see why. It has a great spooky feel, with Old Bailey being a great one-off character. Green. Double Teething Troubles is another fine episode. Not great, just fine. Dark Blue. Stepney Gets Lost is another episode that is pretty much loved by all, and is also a spooky episode that actually succeeded in scaring me on my first viewing, and given I didn't discover any of the TV show other than the first 8 episodes of the first 2 seasons until rather late in my childhood, that's not something I particularly like to admit, but it does speak to the quality of this episode. Green. Toby Discovery is another very good episode, with good expansion to Sodor's lore. Light Blue. Something in the Air is also a good episode. Nothing special, but still very good. Light Blue. Thomas Percy and Old Slowcoach is a good episode, but not much more. I really like the scene where they're fighting the fire, but the rest of the episode is just fine at best. Dark Blue. Thomas and the Rumours is one I personally find very underrated. It's not that people don't like this episode, but coming in such an awesome, action-packed season in Season 5, this comes across as a bit underappreciated and doesn't get the recognition it deserves. I personally love this episode, a rare example of where a somewhat obvious moral feels natural and not forced in, and I think it's worthy of a green ranking. Oliver's Find is another very good episode, featuring the rediscovery of Toby's old line, a rare example of the TV show consciously using something they changed from Audrey's Law in later episodes. Light Blue. Happy Ever After is an episode that has grown on me in recent years. I used to lump this episode together with Make Someone Happy, as episodes that focused on humans that came across as a bit boring. But I now actually really enjoy this episode, and the Good Luck package is really fun. I was on the boundary between light and dark blue, but in the end decided to push up to a light blue ranking. So Topham Hatt's Holiday is another amusing episode focused on the Fat Controller. Light blue. A Surprise for Percy is another great Percy episode with an amazing runaway scene, with Bertie being strangely philosophical. Green. Make Someone Happy. I still always lump this at the bottom with Happy Ever After. While Happy Ever After has moved its way up, this one hasn't. It's a nice little episode, but is a bit boring and there's not much to it. Yellow. Busy Going Backwards is an amazing episode. The concept of Toad being frustrated with always going backwards is a great one, and the runaway scene is outstanding. Green. Duncan Gets Spooked is one of the most well-known spooky episodes of the show. This episode both nails the spooky atmosphere and leaves just enough about Rusty's ghost engine ambiguous, with an idea whether it was real or not, and also whether or not it may have been Proteus. Green. Rusty and the Boulder is an incredibly fun episode. Sure, it's unrealistic, but you can sweep that under the rug as long as it's still somewhat believable, which this is, and a good episode, which this is. A definite green episode in my mind. And finally, the finale to this era of the show is Snow. Snow is a fine episode, one of the better season finales from this era. Not amazing, but still a very good episode. Light Blue. Season 5 has a total of 14 outstanding episodes, 7 great episodes, 3 good episodes, and 2 okay episodes. The average score for the season is an outstanding 8.8 out of 10. My top 5 episodes for the season are A Better View for Gordon, Toby and the Flood, Busy Going Backwards, Duncan Gets Spooked, and Rusty and the Boulder. And my overall favourite is Toby and the Flood. As you may have worked out from all the greens and the high ranking, Season 5 is my personal favourite season. One of the big two, it was the end of Thomas's golden age, and the end of Brittlecroft's time at the helm. The classic era, as a whole, had 40 outstanding episodes, 39 great episodes, 42 good ones, 8 okay, and 1 bad. The era has an overall average score of 8.1 out of 10. This era was about as good at start as any TV show could wish to have. The effort put in by everyone was more than would be expected for a kids show, and they truly made something brilliant that would last, something the later eras could only dream to replicate. The ranking of the seasons in this era are as follows. In 5th place, Season 2 with a ranking of 7.63. Then Season 3 with 7.88. Season 1 with 7.95. Season 4 with 8.08. And Season 5 with a stunning 8.78. My top 5 episodes are Old Iron, Edward's Exploit, Bulldog, Toby and the Flood, and Duncan Gets Spooked, with my overall favourite episode from the classic era being Edward's Exploit. Now, this video took an absolute age to make, as you can probably imagine. The PowerPoint video for this took ages to make, and the script was at times a pain to write, as you may have worked out from a lot of my barely one-line reviews of some of the episodes. I will try and get the Ghislaine era video out as soon as possible, but tell me in the comments whether you want me to purely focus on that video so I can get it out as soon as possible, or work on other smaller projects at the same time, so I'm able to keep more regular uploads. But that is all for today. Please like if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I will see you in another video very soon.